Welcome back to Personalist Manifestos. I'm Michael Morelli, the host of this ongoing conversation about contemplative revolution. In this episode, Grace G. Sun Kim becomes the first ever returning guest on this show. And in this conversation, we talk about her new book, Earthbound, God at the Intersection of Climate and Justice. Grace's book offers a transformative vision of divine presence that calls us to active, restorative justice in a world crying out for restoration. Now, two things about this recording. First, it's audio only, although you can watch a YouTube video with some nice-looking audio waves if you want some visuals. Second, there might be a bit of background noise here and there. I had to record this conversation on the fly at a conference in between keynote talks Grace was giving and panels she was speaking on. In fact, right after this conversation ended, Grace had to run to a panel session, and she still had her lapel mic on when she was up there. Still, it feels right that this conversation is an unvarnished field recording. It has the spirit of the Spirit. You know, the one who is like the wind blowing, wherever, whenever, and totally out of our control. So hopefully our dialogue helps you hear the wind of the Spirit and respond with care for the creation that the Spirit is breathing life into. And so, with that, here is my conversation with Grace.
Thank you so much for having me back and to actually meet you in person, because so many of these podcasts, you just do it over technology, over Zoom or other platforms, so you never get to meet them.
Yeah.
But to meet you in person, it's been a joy to meet you at this conference in Vancouver. So I don't know, but every day I'm struggling that I'm not doing enough. So I'm like, I got to keep going and doing more. So I'm thrilled that Earthbound is out. And in about 4 or 5 months, another book will be coming out called Feminist Theologies. Yeah. So I'm really excited about that one.
Well, it's encouraging for me because I do relate when it feels like, I don't know, you're never doing enough. I feel like that's part of the hustle culture that we're in, especially like in and beyond academia.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see somebody else making a go of it and doing it. It's like now I see it. I know it's possible. Yeah. It is possible to.
Well, you're so much younger than me. How old are your kids?
8 and 5.
Yeah. When my kids were 8 and 5, I couldn't do anything. Yeah. So when my first book came out, The Grace of Sophia, I think that came out 2002. And then my next book, I had 3 little kids at home. It was such a nightmare. And then I think the next book didn't come out until 2010 or 11. So there was a huge gap. And your kids are way too young. So for you to even do this podcast is amazing. And to do once a week is even more amazing. So that's great. I'm just very happy that you can even accomplish this when your kids are so young.
Well, thank you. It means a lot. I think like the first couple of years getting into an academic post, I really hustled hard. I mean, I was designing new courses from scratch. I was trying to turn my PhD thesis into a book. And I did have this 2 or 3 year stretch of like, get the kids in bed, it's 8 o'clock, pour an espresso shot, pour a glass of whiskey, and just go, whether it was like lecture prep or like getting that manuscript done that I said I would get it done.
It is
but
so
I can
hard.
only do that for like 2 or 3 years because I'm like, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so now I'm like, I've just had to slow down a bit and also learn to soak up these moments because actually the most important thing I can be doing actually is being a dad for these kids who do need me a lot. But like, they're going to grow up, they're still going to need me, but they're going to need me in a different way. And I'm actually, I call them barnacles. They're like barnacles, at this age. So when they, evolve beyond being barnacles, well, then I'll have more time to write at a decent hour. Yeah. But like, how do you soak this up now and actually have that form you and you consider that to be your most important work?
Yeah. Well, I would tell you not to stress too much because at that time, from 2001 to 2010, when the next book came out, I was stressed out of my mind that I couldn't get my second book out. I was devastated. I'm like, what's wrong with me? But looking back, I should have enjoyed the kids a bit more. It was the kids that soaked up all my time. And you're too tired after they go to bed because then now you feel like you have to sleep too. Because I literally was teaching almost falling asleep when students were doing presentations. I remember pinching my arm and my leg to keep awake because I didn't have enough sleep. And looking back, that's so bad for our whole well-being in our bodies. So you are already doing too much and more than enough. So just enjoy your kids, and writing will come later. Now my kids are all in their 20s. I have so much more time. I'm still stressed out because of them, but it's a different life and it becomes much easier. So you're younger, way younger than me. So enjoy what you're doing, and you're already doing more than regular professors. And those who are not professors and listening, people just think we have all this time on our hands, but no, there's so much work behind the scene, like course prep, grading, and then speaking, and tons of emails and so many meetings. People don't understand that our life is like so chaotic. So you're doing a great job. So thanks for having me back as a second guest.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll tell one more story and then we'll get into Earthbound. I saw the lead pastor at the church I go to at an event over the summer. We were just chatting, and he's got a very demanding job. He's really busy. And so we were talking and checking in after seeing each other for a while, and he goes, sometimes it just feels like what I got into ministry for, like I don't actually have time to do. And he goes, I just sometimes look at what you're doing, Michael, you're a professor, and I'm like, kind of envy that. Like, you just get to like read the Bible and teach all the time. I was like, brother, you should job shadow me for a week. I was like, that is very much not what I do. I'm like, that sounds pretty nice. You're like, yeah. So the grass is always greener, I guess. But
that's how they think about preachers, like, ministers. They only work 1 hour a week.
Yeah.
But there's so much work. But I remember when my kid was young, so he was in junior high, he needed a pair of shorts. So I dropped him off in the morning. He was at summer camp at Johns Hopkins. It was like from 8 to 8 at night. So it's like 12 hours away. But he told me, can you get me a pair of shorts? So when I picked him up at night, I said, mom was too busy to pick up shorts. He goes, what do you do all day?
Yes, yeah.
But that is exactly how people view professors or ministers, or those where they see only 1 hour at, and then they think that their whole day is free or their whole week is free. No, it's very busy. And, this podcast that you're doing is great. And not every professor has a podcast, or any scholar. We're just a few that have it. And you're making a big impact in the public sphere. So I'm just honored to be invited back again. Yeah. But you can invite me 3 times when the next book comes out.
Well, if you keep turning out the books, I'll keep inviting you to talk about them.
Thank you.
So you've kind of informally introduced yourself, or indirectly, I guess I should say. You teach, you write. What else do people need to know about Grace?
I have a podcast just like you. It's called Madang Podcast, which is hosted by the Christian Century. Unlike you, 1 guest a week. I only do 1 a month. And that is way too much work. So it is so much more work. And, but you can subscribe, and I have my Substack, so people can, you have your Substack too?
Yep.
Yeah. So we both have our Substack, so people can subscribe and follow us on our Substack.
Yeah,
so
for
life
sure.
is busy.
I'll put all those links in the show notes.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I want to talk about Earthbound. There is a lot of work being done on eco-theology as of late, and for good reason. But one of the things that I think is interesting about your sort of record as a scholar is that you have been writing in the area of eco-theology and a lot of other areas, intersectionality, feminism, justice in general. So this is not sort of you jumping on the eco-theology train. You've already been on the train for a while, but can you tell me a little bit about what prompted you to write this book at this time?
Yeah. So I was doing a lot of climate change work with the World Council of Churches already, probably for over 10 years. And I was writing this book on and off. So that's what happens. I've got like 2 or 3 books. Sometimes they don't get finished. So they're just sitting in my laptop. But then other ones, you just come to it whenever you get a new idea. So I was writing Earthbound on and off for many years. And I just didn't get the kind of like that important point of the book until I finished When God Became White. So listeners, I was interviewed by you before, so you can go back and listen to When God Became White. So When God Became White, I was really trying to break away from the whiteness and the maleness of who God is, and I moved towards, the spirit understanding of God and Hakma. So there are these other forms of viewing and understanding God. So when that book was done, I then thought, oh, there was something else I should have added in that book. And that aspect was God as a verb. So I never touched that on When God Became White, and the book was already in production. So I couldn't add anymore. And it was a complete book. Like I couldn't just add that at the end. So I thought, well, the Earthbound I'm working on, that's the missing point, the missing thing that was not there that I couldn't finish the book. So that's why that's how I kind of finished the book. So the book was being written over many years. It just, that part of who God is was the missing link to finish this book. So I hope people will grab Earthbound and see what I actually mean by God as a verb.
Well, yeah, because actually having both books fresh in my mind, it makes a lot of sense that this would actually be a follow-up. And you do get into When God Became White, right? Like there's this vision of God as a white God who is distant from creation and only sort of intervenes once in a while.
Yeah.
And usually when that intervention happens, it's to reward us for being good or punish us for being bad. But there's this distance from creation, but that's not actually the vision of God that we get in Scripture, that God is a creator. And in order to understand the creator, you have to understand the creator's creation. And so, maybe there's more the focus on the creator, but you're actually saying we can't speak about this creator without speaking about the creation. And so now you're sort of spinning that out into, okay, now let's see the theater in which this God is operating. So that, and in an active, dynamic way, not in a static way.
Yeah, exactly. So, this climate change is one of the biggest social justice issues of our time. So as people of faith, as Christians, how are we going to fight this? And many people don't realize how our image of God impacts our own actions. And that was really the point of When God Became White. I really wanted people, the readers, to make that clear connection. How we view God impacts how I would treat you, how I would treat immigrants, how I would treat strangers or your family members. Because if we continue to uphold the white male God, we're going to continue to say that white people are better than the rest, people of color, or men are better than women. So to break away from that mentality is to really reimagine who God is. So in this climate crisis that we are living in, reimagining God is so important. And so viewing God as a verb has been so refreshing for me. It was really liberating. And that's the point. That really moves us, that we also need to act and to change and to be moved. So, the Earthbound book isn't a heavily theological kind of treatise or anything. It's just like a more for the church, for people of faith, for those who are kind of searching. They understand that there is this climate change problem. How are we going to fix it? So how we view God really determines our actions and our behaviors. So that's kind of where I'm moving and writing from for Earthbound.
Okay, that's really helpful. And I'm curious, when did you first encounter eco-theology, intersectionality, and when did sort of the weight of climate change really hit you? Because I think for anybody who's encountered those terms, there's sort of adverse reactions for some, and then there's positive transformation that comes out of them. So I'm interested in the sort of the origin story for you. When did you first sort of encounter these terms, and what did the sort of aha moments look like for you?
Yeah, so I was doing just climate change work on my own just from when I was young. So it was always there. I didn't even know the term, climate change or climate crisis until much later. But I was already focused in that area. And then maybe about 20 years ago, I started working with the World Council of Churches on climate change. Maybe 15 years ago. It wasn't quite 20 years ago. And so when I was working with the World Council of Churches, it became very important to me that if people of faith aren't working on climate change and this climate justice issue, I don't know what our calling in life is. So it is everything to do with who God is, this climate crisis. So I've already been working on this with the World Council of Churches, and then I was doing kind of denominational work and other church work, trying to kind of motivate people, not from a theological perspective. It was only with Earthbound that it became more of a theological perspective, but more to point out that we as Christians aren't doing a good job. Mm-hmm. We are part of the problem. So before Earthbound, I had the book, Han and the Transformative Spirit. That's not the full title. I can't remember the full title, but that one I was already writing stuff about climate change. And then with the World Council of Churches, I published through them Making Peace with the Earth. And that was really more church-oriented, how churches can really engage in fighting climate change. And then the theological work came in Planetary Solidarity. It's an edited volume, more focused on gender justice and eco-justice. And I co-edited it with Hilda Koster. And then this is another one where I just brought in more theology, church, and the climate crisis, kind of from the science, kind of sociological perspective, and I kind of put it together. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is actually something that I talk about as an ethicist. Like, there's so many big questions that people are wrestling with, and a lot of them are politicized, a lot of them are divisive and get you in trouble for talking about them. And when students ask me about them, I actually foreground climate change as like the ethical issue, because I'm like, take whatever other ones we're talking about. We actually can't even talk about them if we're underwater, on fire, or can't breathe the air. Like, let's
if
triage.
There's no planet, that's the end of us.
Right?
That's the end of humanity. Yeah.
Like, what should our politics be? What should our theology and ethics of gender and sexuality be? I'm like, look, those are important, but if you can't breathe the air, if we don't have like sustainable food sources and can't drink our water, like, nobody's getting married. Nobody's voting. And it's kind of this comical way of just saying, like, let's actually prioritize this like issue that concerns us all. And I have thoughts on like actually the soil that we walk on, the air that we breathe, the water we drink, like that actually is our hope for a political way forward, because that's like our common interest. But you're gesturing to some of the other factors that work their way into climate change, the climate crisis, where things like gender, race, economic class, where you happen to be born, like geographically in the world, these sorts of things. For people who hear that and they're like, how does gender relate to climate? How does like race relate to this? Or, they hear maybe a more progressive politician talking about eco-justice and they're kind of like, what? How would you describe those connections, just for those who are wondering what those connections are?
That's such a great question, because that's a very common question. People don't see the connection. So one of the other books I wrote, Intersectional Theology, with Susan Shaw. In that book, we're really trying to convey that these social justice issues are not isolated issues. They're not in a silo by themselves. So when we're trying to work on gender justice, that's not isolated from racial justice, economic justice, sexual orientation, ageism. These are all interrelated and intersecting. And the one issue that people always love to kind of separate from them, so people already have a hard time kind of putting those items together. social justice items together, but then they feel like climate change is something totally off. But these are all interrelated. That's why we talk about environmental racism, because we know how the poor people, who are usually people of color, suffer way more than white rich people and white rich men. Mm-hmm. So women suffer more. So there is already the gender justice issue. There is that racial justice issue. There's the economic justice issue. Poor people around the globe are suffering way more, are dying, losing their livelihood way more than the rich people. So that's how it's so clear that these are all intersecting, all interrelated. That's why tackling one issue means tackling all issues. Yeah. And that's the approach that we need to come to. This climate justice, as you kind of mentioned, is the biggest issue of our time. If there is no air to breathe, we will die. If the water, covers all of the earth, we're all going to die. There's nothing left for us to do. So we really have to take this issue seriously, and as people of faith, ask ourselves, what are we going to do differently to save the planet? God created all of this. God is here in our midst. Once we hurt the planet, once we destroy the trees, once we kill all the animals, the Spirit of God is all within us and among us. We are not just hurting the tree or the animals. We are bringing pain and suffering to God too. So that's something to understand, that these are all kind of intermeshed, intertwined, interrelated together. It's not separated, because God is with us. That's what Scripture tells us very clearly. When 2 or 3 are gathered, I am in your midst. The Spirit of God is upon us and in us, hovering over the earth. So I hope that, the listeners will grab the book Earthbound, but really reflect on how these issues are interrelated, intersecting, and how we need to kind of tackle all of them together.
You're talking about like the presence and like omnipresence of God, and God's like, God is not a noun, just a noun, but God is also a verb. Yeah. And it made me think, as I was reading your book, like about this present animating spirit in creation. It makes me think about Genesis 2 and the creation of people is from the earth. And it's the animating breath of God that makes us more than just the earth. But there's that inherent holistic connection to it. Yeah. But you're not just locating that in people. You're also locating, like, when God spoke creation into being, God's breath was active there as well. Yeah. And that's just not... if you're sort of raised in the sort of typical North American framework, like capitalist, extractive framework, and then you like throw religion on there, where like Genesis is used to excuse that extractive mindset and that sort of thing. Like, what you're talking about is much more in tune with creation and much more holistically connected. And actually, the way we view creation is how we view ourselves, and vice versa, right? But tell me more about this animating spirit, like, because there may be some people who are not as familiar with this view who may sort of wonder about it and may get a little bit skittish. But like, how does it work its way out? Like, would you be comfortable like using the term panentheism to describe like your perspective or some of the perspectives that you're engaging with? Or is that a term that you would shy away from, or would you use different terms? Like, yeah, I'm interested in that facet of what you're doing with this view of creation being animated by a spirit.
Yeah, so I'm very comfortable using panentheism, that God is in, the air and the water. That's very kind of Aboriginal, Native American way of thinking, and many indigenous people's ways of thinking, that God, the Spirit of God, is among us. I think why Christians have such a difficult time with this and feel like climate change is not a big issue is, well, you kind of mentioned capitalism, so that's one problem. But the bigger problem is dualism. So Christianity emerged under the Roman Empire, and the Greco-Roman philosophy was heavily influencing Christianity. Constantine made Christianity the religion under the empire, and that was in 325 or so. The impact of philosophy on Christianity was huge. So under dualism, under the Greco-Roman philosophy of dualism, the world is divided into two categories. So to make it simple, it would be spirit and body, heaven and earth. Did I say spirit and body?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. Man and woman. Wisdom and logos. So you divide and you prefer, the masculine over the feminine. You prefer the spirit over the body. So there is this division, and then there's a preference of one over the other. So Christians have kept saying the body is bad, it's evil. It's like this great evacuation plan that's the term that Brian McLaren uses, to go to heaven. Nothing on earth matters. It's, our spirit, what happens to us when we die and go to heaven. So that's kind of been like the thought of Christianity for the 2,000 years. So here you see a clear distinction between spirit and creation. But if we move away from this dualistic view of the world, where, in Asia and Africa and other parts of the world, we don't think in these dualistic terms, then you come to recognize this animating power of the Spirit, that the Spirit is among us and in us, moving and creating, and we are co-creating. God's Spirit is in all of God's creation. That's very clear in the creation stories in Genesis. God breathes and life is given. So Old Testament Ruha and New Testament Pneuma, it's wind, breath, air, energy. So the Spirit of God is all around us. And when we see it that way, then we're like, how can I continue to destroy the world? The world that God created and said was so beautiful. We are to be co-creators and caretakers of
gardeners.
the earth. Yeah, gardeners, rather than domination and destruction, which is so associated with the noun understanding of God. So we have used patriarchal words like king and lord and master, and those words for God gets translated into our own lives, and we feel like if God is like that, then we can be masters and destructors, and we can dominate over the earth. That's why there is this correlation. So people need to be careful, and people fail to, and I talked about it in When God Became White. These metaphors are mere metaphors. It is not God. But people in the pews think God is king, God is master, God is Lord. But that's why in the Earthbound, I really want to move away from that and embrace this theology of verbs. So I kind of touch on that. And I don't want to spend too much time on it because I want people to actually get the book and read it.
We don't want to give too many spoilers. No, I think one of the things I love doing is actually exploring the many other images for God that are used, and how that like expands our imagination of God's character, but also God's action in the world. So like the nouns and verbs. I think the one I've been thinking a lot about is the divine mother hen and the gathering in like chicks.
And I include that.
Oh, nice. Love it. So good. So I want to zero on one thing, because I think a lot about baptism. So you talk about the connections between baptism and sort of as a theological way of resisting pollution. Can you talk about that? And then I want to end with this like a short thing of like what brings you hope, because eco-dread is real. So I want to hear like what brings you hope, but I feel like baptism is a great precursor to that.
Okay, I'll answer those and then we'll end the interview. So, when we think about baptism, we use water and we believe it to be the living water. Jesus says, I will give you water so you will not thirst again. So once we see this clear connection of this holiness of the water, and water is the life life-giving aspect for all of creation. You and I, we need water to exist. We need the plants to live, and the plants need the water. So this whole interconnectedness and recognizing this holiness. And so that should really turn us around and make us realize that we really need to take care of the earth and the water. And, our body is composed of so much water, 75% or whatever the percentage is. What was the second question? I just forgot.
What brings you hope?
Oh, yes. So one of my books is called Hope in Disarray. So in that book, I'm focusing on hope in this broken world. This world is broken because of racism and sexism and patriarchy and whiteness and this climate crisis that we're living in. So hope is something that gives us this groundedness in Christ that pushes us to work for justice. So that's what hope is. Hope is not this fuzzy-dovey, optimistic feeling. It is what grounds us in Christ and pushes us for justice. And right now, we need to work for climate justice. So I hope people who read the book will be inspired to do climate justice work. The book, every chapter has Q&A questions, so I hope people can read it alone or together or in adult forum so that people can work together to figure out how are we going to fight this climate change.
Well, thank you for your time. You actually have to go to a panel now. So thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Check out Grace's book.
Thank you so much for having me, and invite me back anytime.
Oh, of course.